Sometimes the greatest acts of mercy come with the heaviest price. Imagine living for centuries, watching everyone you could ever care about wither away, knowing that your very touch brings darkness to their world. This is the burden of Caelen, an ancient vampire who has walked alone through the medieval mountains for longer than memory serves. On one storm-torn night, he finds a dying woman cast out by her village Elira, a healer they called a witch. With her final breath slipping away, Caelen makes a choice that will bind them together forever. He saves her life by making her like him, condemning her to his eternal darkness. Now she must live with what he has done to her, and he must face what it means to force immortality upon someone who never asked for it. But what happens when two broken souls discover that even the damned can find redemption? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains of Valdris had forgotten their own names, much like the castle that crowned their highest peak. Time had worn away the carved letters above the great iron gates, leaving only weathered stone and the whispered memories of wind through broken battlements. Here, where mist clung to ancient walls like the breath of ghosts, Caelen Draven walked the same path he had trod for 3 centuries. His footsteps echoed through the great hall, a sound that had once been joined by dozens of others, servants, knights, family. Now only silence answered the rhythm of his boots against stones that had been laid when kings still believed in honor and queens still wept for their fallen sons. The tapestries that had once depicted the glory of House Draven hung in tatters, their golden threads dulled to the color of old blood. Caelen paused before the massive fireplace, its carved mantle still bearing the crest of his house, a raven with wings spread wide, clutching a sword in its talons. Around one finger, he wore the only remaining proof of his noble birth, a bloodstone signet ring that caught the firelight like a drop of ancient wine. The weight of it had grown heavier with each passing decade, not from the gold and stone, but from the memories it carried. He had been Lord Caelen then, heir to lands that stretched from the mountain peaks to the fertile valleys below. His father had ruled with wisdom, his mother with grace, and their people had prospered under the protection of House Draven. That was before the plague came, before the desperate bargain, before the night when everything he had been dyed with his mortality. The transformation had not been his choice, not truly. When the sickness took his parents and threatened to claim his younger sister, Caelen had sought help from any source that might offer salvation. The woman who answered his prayers wore beauty like a mask and spoke promises sweeter than honey. She could save his family, she said, if he was willing to pay the price. What was his soul against the lives of those he loved? He had learned too late that some prices extract more than they promise. His family lived, yes, but as creatures of the night, bound to hunger and shadow. His sister, sweet Lyanna, who had sung like a nightingale, became a predator who stalked the very villages she had once blessed with her voice. His parents, noble and just, transformed into beings driven by needs they could not control or deny. The maker who had turned them, the beautiful woman whose name he had never learned, vanished before the first moon waned, leaving behind only newborn monsters struggling to understand what they had become. The other noble houses, once allied through marriage and treaty, declared House Draven cursed and sent armies to cleanse the mountains of their presence. What followed was a war that lasted 3 bloody years. Not all vampires were equal in strength or cunning, and the human armies came prepared with silver weapons and knowledge gleaned from ancient texts. One by one, Caelen watched his family fall. His father, pierced through the heart while defending the village that had turned against them. His mother, surrounded and overwhelmed while trying to protect the children she could no longer safely embrace. His sister, the last to perish, burned by the very people whose lullabies she had once sung. Caelen alone survived, and survival became its own curse. The armies retreated, believing the vampire threat ended, But he remained in the ruins of his ancestral home, neither truly alive nor properly dead. The villagers in the valleys below spoke of him now only in whispers, warning their children against wandering too far up the mountain paths when darkness fell. For 300 years he had walked these empty halls, sustained by animal blood, and the occasional bandit foolish enough to seek shelter in what they assumed was an abandoned keep. He told himself it was justice, taking only those who preyed upon innocence. But justice was a luxury for the living, and he was neither judge nor executioner, merely a creature trying to maintain the last threads of his humanity. The loneliness was the worst part. Humans feared him, as was right and proper. Other vampires were rare, and those he encountered were either too young to understand the weight of immortality or too old to care about anything beyond their next meal. He had tried in the early decades to seek out companions among his kind. Each attempt ended in disappointment or tragedy. There was Marcus, turned during the plague years of the last century, who had seemed promising until madness took him. Elena, beautiful and fierce, who had stayed for nearly a decade before growing restless and wandering into a hunter's trap. Thomas, scholarly and kind, who chose to greet the sunrise rather than face another century of darkness. Each loss carved a deeper hollow in what remained of Caelen's heart. The seasons turned without meaning now. Spring brought no hope of renewal. Summer offered no warmth to his cold flesh. Autumn's harvest meant nothing to one who could not partake. And winter was simply another form of the eternal cold he carried within. He maintained the keep, not from pride, but from habit, repairing what storms damaged, clearing paths that no guest would ever walk, tending fires that gave warmth only to empty rooms. Tonight felt different, though he could not say why. The air itself seemed charged, heavy with the promise of change. From the tall windows of his solar, Caelen could see dark clouds gathering above the peaks, moving with unnatural purpose. Lightning flickered in their depths like trapped souls fighting for freedom. The wind that preceded the storm carried strange scents, not just the clean smell of approaching rain, but something else. Something that made his ancient instincts stir. He found himself drawn to the highest tower, the one his father had used as a watchtower in the days when enemies were mortal and battles could be won with steel and strategy. From here, he could see the entire valley spread below the village lights, twinkling like fallen stars, the river winding silver through fields already turned gold with autumn grain. The storm was massive, larger than any he had witnessed in his long existence. It stretched across the sky like a living thing, its edges crackling with energy that seemed almost supernatural. As he watched, the wind began to howl through the mountain passes, with a sound like voices crying out in anguish. The storm was not merely weather, it was something far more primal, something that spoke to the darkness in his blood. Thunder rolled across the mountains with such force that even the ancient stones of the keep seemed to tremble. In that sound, Caelen heard something that made him step back from the window. The voice of the storm seemed to be calling his name. Not the name he wore now, but the older one, the name his mother had whispered when she rocked him to sleep centuries ago, the name carved on tombstones in the family crypt. Lightning split the sky directly overhead, and in that brilliant flash, Caelen saw something that made his dead heart skip. Far down the mountain slope, barely visible against the storm-lashed landscape, a figure stumbled through the growing tempest, human, female, and clearly in distress. Every instinct screamed at him to remain in the safety of his tower. Humans meant nothing but trouble either. They fled in terror, spreading tales that brought hunters, or they stayed long enough to become problems of a different sort. He had learned to avoid them entirely, hunting only when absolutely necessary, and then far from his home territory. But something about this figure called to him with the same inexorable pull as the storm itself. Perhaps it was the way she moved, not with the panic of someone lost, but with the determined struggle of someone fighting against impossible odds. Perhaps it was the defiance in her posture, even as the wind tried to tear her from the path. Or perhaps it was simply that after 3 centuries of solitude, any human contact seemed precious enough to risk. The bloodstone ring on his finger grew warm against his skin, something that had never happened before. His father had worn this ring for 60 years, and his grandfather before that. Legend claimed it was blessed by an ancient power, that it would warn its bearer of moments when destiny called. Caelen had always assumed such tales were mere superstition, but now he was not so certain. The woman stumbled again, and this time she did not rise immediately. Even from his great height, Caelen could see that she was weakening, that the storm was winning its battle against her mortal flesh. If he did nothing, she would die out there in the mud and rain, become nothing more than another victim of the mountain's harsh embrace. He could let her perish. It would be the safe choice, the practical choice. One human life weighed against 3 centuries of hard-won solitude. The mathematics seemed clear enough. But as another flash of lightning illuminated her prone form, Caelen found himself moving toward the stairs. His feet carried him down the winding steps of the tower, through the great hall with its silent memories, toward the massive oak doors that separated his world from the storm beyond. With each step, the ring on his finger grew warmer, until it seemed to pulse with a heat that matched the rhythm of the heart he no longer possessed. At the doors, he paused one final time. Beyond the threshold lay a choice that would change everything. He could feel it in his bones, in the very air he no longer needed to breathe. The woman in the storm was not just another lost traveler. She was something else, something that would shatter the careful isolation he had built around himself like armor. The bloodstone ring flared with sudden heat, and in that moment Caelen knew that destiny would not be denied. With movements swift as shadow, he lifted the heavy bar that secured the doors and stepped into the teeth of the storm, leaving behind the safety of his ancient sanctuary to answer a call he did not yet understand. The wind hit him like a physical blow, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth and something else, something that made his fangs ache with sudden hunger. Human blood, yes, but blood mixed with fear and pain, and something indefinably different. As he made his way down the treacherous slope toward the fallen figure, Caelen began to suspect that the storm had brought him more than just another dying stranger. It had brought him his future, whether he was ready for it or not. The storm's fury seemed to part before Caelen as he descended the mountain path, his supernatural senses cutting through the chaos of wind and rain. Each flash of lightning revealed more details of the figure collapsed ahead. A woman, certainly, but not the simple peasant he had expected. Her clothing, though torn and mud-stained, spoke of quality. The leather boots on her feet were well made, and the cloak that whipped around her in the wind bore the careful stitching of skilled hands. As he drew closer, the scent that had called to him from the tower grew stronger. Blood, yes, but not the simple copper tang of an ordinary wound. This blood carried something else, a richness, a complexity that made his ancient hunger stir in ways he had not felt for decades. There was power in that scent, old power that spoke to memories buried deep in his immortal consciousness. She lay face down in the mud, her dark hair plastered against her skull by the relentless rain. One arm was twisted beneath her body at an angle that suggested broken bones, and a gash along her temple leaked crimson into the storm-churned earth. But it was the leather satchel still clutched in her other hand that made Caelen pause. Even unconscious, even dying, she held tight to whatever that worn bag contained. Gently, he turned her over, and in the next lightning flash, he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was perhaps 30 years in mortal reckoning, with strong features that spoke of intelligence and determination. Her skin, pale from blood loss and exposure, showed the calluses of someone accustomed to work, not the soft hands of nobility, but the capable fingers of a craftswoman. There was something familiar about her features, though he could not place why. The satchel fell open as he lifted her, spilling its contents across the muddy ground. Dried herbs scattered in the wind, angelica, feverfew, bloodroot, nightshade. The unmistakable tools of a healer's trade. Caelen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. In the villages below, healers who knew too much about the old ways often found themselves accused of darker practices. As if summoned by his thoughts, voices echoed up from the valley, distant shouts carried on the wind. Torches bobbed like angry fireflies in the darkness, moving up the mountain path with purpose. A search party, or something far worse. The woman in his arms stirred slightly, and he caught a whispered word on her lips. Please. The voices grew closer, and Caelen could make out individual words now. Witch. Devil's work. Should have burned her when we had the chance. The familiar hatred in those voices brought back memories of his own family's persecution. The way neighbors had turned to enemies when fear overcame reason. Looking down at the dying woman Elira, he realized, for that was the name the voices in the storm had whispered, Caelen faced a choice that would echo through eternity. She had perhaps minutes left before blood loss or exposure claimed her. The mob below would find her body come morning and count it as justice served. Another healer silenced. Another woman who knew too much about herbs and healing, destroyed by those who preferred their mysteries simple and their scapegoats convenient. But he could save her. The power flowed in his veins, ancient and terrible and absolute. With his blood, he could pull her back from death's threshold, grant her the immortal strength to outlive her persecutors by centuries. The cost was everything she had been, her mortality, her ability to walk in sunlight, her freedom to live and die by her own choices. The cost was making her like him. Elira's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with surprising clarity for someone so close to death. They were green as spring leaves, those eyes, and in them he saw intelligence, pain, and something else, a recognition that seemed impossible. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper above the storm's howl. "I know you," she said, words that made no sense. "From the dreams, the Raven Lord who walks alone." Her fingers, slick with rain and blood, reached up to touch his face. "You're real." The mob's torches were growing brighter now, close enough that Caelen could hear individual voices calling for the witch's blood. They would find them soon, and then all choices would be taken away. Elira would die here in the mud, and he would be forced to flee deeper into the mountains or risk exposure himself. "I can save you," he whispered, leaning close so she could hear him over the thunder. "But the price is everything you are. I can give you immortal life, but you will never again be human. You will be like me, cursed to walk in shadow, sustained by blood, watched always by death." She studied his face with those remarkable eyes, and he saw no fear there, only a sadness so profound it seemed to echo his own. "The alternative is dying here in the rain while they celebrate my death. At least your curse comes with the promise of time to make it mean something. You don't understand what you're asking. I am damned, and I will damn you with me. There is no going back, no cure, no hope of redemption." A smile touched her lips, made tragic by the blood that stained them. "Everyone is damned in their own way. At least this damnation comes with the chance to help others. I've seen what you are in the dreams, not a monster, but a guardian who has forgotten his own worth." The voices were close now, close enough that Caelen could smell the torch smoke on the wind. In moments they would crest the ridge and see the two figures silhouetted against the storm. There was no more time for debate, no opportunity for second thoughts or gentle persuasion. "Forgive me," Caelen whispered, and sank his fangs into the soft flesh of her throat. Her blood was like nothing he had ever tasted, rich with power, warm with life, complex with knowledge passed down through generations. In that blood he tasted herbs and healing, saw flashes of her memories like fragments of broken glass. A childhood spent learning the old ways from a grandmother who remembered when healers were revered instead of feared. Years of study, of careful practice, of lives saved with nothing more than skill and compassion. The growing suspicion of her neighbors as crops failed and children sickened despite her best efforts. The accusation that shattered her world witchcraft, they called it, as if kindness and knowledge were sins to be punished. As her life flowed into him, Caelen felt her experiences become his own. The loneliness of being different, of knowing truths that others feared to hear. The weight of responsibility that came with power, the crushing burden of being needed by the very people who hated her for what she could do. In many ways, her story was his own, separated only by centuries and the nature of their gifts. When her heart stuttered to near silence, he bit into his own wrist and pressed the wound to her lips. His ancient blood, thick with power, accumulated over 3 centuries, flowed into her dying body. The transformation was immediate and terrible. Her spine arched as supernatural strength flooded her limbs. Her fingers curled into claws as fangs erupted from her gums. Her eyes blazed with an inner fire that would never again know the simple warmth of human emotion. The mob reached the ridge just as Elira's transformation completed itself, their torches revealing nothing but empty mud, where moments before a dying woman had lain. Caelen had moved them both with inhuman speed to the shelter of a rocky outcropping, where they could observe without being seen. The villagers searched for nearly an hour before giving up, grumbling about storms and wasted time, and the certainty that the witch had gotten what she deserved from the mountain's harsh mercy. When the last torch disappeared down the valley, Caelen turned his attention to the woman who was no longer entirely human. Elira sat with her back against the stone, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. The wound on her temple had healed completely, leaving only pale skin where torn flesh had been. Her broken arm was whole again, stronger than it had ever been in life. "It's done," she said, and her voice carried new harmonics, deeper, richer, touched with the resonance of the supernatural. "I can feel it in every fiber of my being, the hunger, the strength, the terrible clarity of what I've become." "I'm sorry," Caelen said, and meant it more than any words he had ever spoken. "I had no right to make that choice for you." She looked at him then, those green eyes now flecked with gold, and smiled with fangs that gleamed like pearls in the darkness. "Perhaps not, but you made it anyway, and now we both must live with the consequences. The question is, what do we do with forever?" The storm was beginning to pass, its fury spent on the mountains and valleys below. In the distance, the first pale hints of dawn were beginning to show on the eastern horizon. Soon they would need to seek shelter from the sun that could no longer touch their skin without bringing death. "We go home," Caelen said, surprising himself with the word. He had not called the keep home in decades. It had been merely shelter, a place to hide from the world. But looking at Elira, seeing his own isolation reflected in her transformed features, he felt something stir that he had thought long dead. Perhaps, after 3 centuries of walking alone, he had finally found someone who could understand the weight of immortal solitude. Perhaps redemption was possible after all, even for the damned. As they made their way back up the mountain path toward the ancient keep, Caelen carried Elira's healing satchel, the last remnant of her mortal life, and the first artifact of whatever their shared future might hold. The great hall of the keep felt different, with another presence within its walls. For 3 centuries, Caelen had grown accustomed to the echo of his own footsteps, the whisper of wind through empty chambers, the profound silence that wrapped around him like a familiar shroud. Now, even when Elira was not in sight, he could sense the rhythm of her unnecessary breathing, the subtle shift in the air that marked her passage, the way shadows seemed to bend differently around her transformed form. She had been silent during their journey up the mountain, walking with the careful precision of someone learning to control strength that could shatter stone with a careless gesture. Her healing satchel remained clutched in her hands, the worn leather a tangible link to the life that was now forever behind her. When they reached the keep's massive doors, she paused, looking up at the weathered stones with an expression he could not read. "It's larger than it appeared in the dreams," she said, her new voice carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in his bones, and sadder. Inside, Caelen had led her to the solar, the chamber where he spent most of his waking hours, surrounded by books and memories and the dying embers of fires that gave warmth only to empty air. She moved through the space with an odd familiarity, her fingers trailing along the spines of ancient volumes as if she recognized them from some half-remembered vision. "The dreams you mentioned," Caelen said, settling into his accustomed chair while she explored the room. "How long have you been having them?" "Since childhood." Elira paused before a mirror, one of the few remaining pieces that had belonged to his mortal family. Its silver backing had tarnished with age, but it still showed reflections true enough. She stared at her new face, touching the skin that was already paler, the eyes that now held flecks of inhuman gold. "My grandmother said, some people were born with sight beyond the ordinary world. She taught me to pay attention to such visions, to learn from them." The mirror she studied was no ordinary glass. Caelen remembered his father commissioning it from a craftsman who claimed it would show not just physical appearance, but the truth that lay beneath. Looking at it now, watching Elira confront her transformation in its ancient surface, he wondered what truths it revealed about them both. "What did you see in these dreams?" he asked, though part of him feared the answer. "Loneliness," she said simply. "A man walking empty halls, carrying the weight of centuries like stones in his chest. I saw you standing at windows, looking out at a world you could no longer be part of. I saw you weeping tears of blood for family you couldn't save." She turned from the mirror to face him, and in her transformed features he saw understanding that went deeper than sympathy. "I saw myself there too. Sometimes. Standing beside you, both of us changed, but no longer alone." The words struck him with unexpected force. In all his years of solitude, he had never allowed himself to imagine companionship that might last beyond a few decades. The other vampires he had known had either been too different in temperament or too damaged by their transformations to offer true understanding. But Elira spoke as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire mortal life. "You should hate me," Caelen said, the words emerging rough with emotion he had thought long buried. "I stole your mortality, your choices, your chance for a natural death. I condemned you to hunger for blood and hide from sunlight. You should curse my name, not speak of dreams and destiny." A smile touched her lips, the first he had seen since her transformation. It was sadder now, tempered by fangs and the knowledge of what she had become, but it held warmth he had not expected. "Perhaps I should. But hatred requires energy. I would rather spend learning what I've become and why." The next hours passed in a strange dance of instruction and discovery. Caelen found himself explaining things he had learned through trial and painful error: how to control the enhanced strength that could crush stone, how to move with supernatural speed without losing precision, how to distinguish between the different types of hunger that would now drive her existence. "The thirst for blood is only one appetite," he told her as they stood in the keep's kitchen, a room he had not used for its intended purpose in decades. "There is also hunger for experience, for knowledge, for connection. Vampires who feed only the first hunger become little more than predators. Those who learn to satisfy the others retain their humanity despite their nature." Elira nodded, her attention focused with an intensity that reminded him of students he had known in his mortal days. "And which type of vampire are you?" The question caught him off guard. "I survive," he said finally. "I maintain enough humanity to remember what I was, but not so much that the weight of guilt destroys me entirely." "That sounds like a careful balance." She moved to the window, looking out at the darkened valley below. The sun had set hours ago, and her new nature would no longer allow her to see its light without agony. Perhaps too careful. Before he could ask what she meant, she was moving again, exploring the keep with the systematic thoroughness of someone accustomed to learning new environments quickly. She found his library and spent long minutes examining the collection volumes on history, philosophy, and healing arts collected over 3 centuries. She discovered the armory where weapons from a dozen different eras hung in careful order. She wandered through chambers that had once housed his family, her fingers trailing over furniture that still held the impressions of lives long ended. It was in his sister's room that she paused longest. The chamber had been preserved exactly as Liana had left it, tapestries she had embroidered hanging on the walls, books of poetry arranged on shelves, a music box that played melancholy airs when wound. Caelen had not entered this room in 50 years, but Elira moved through it as if she belonged there. She was musical, Elira observed, touching the strings of a harp that had been silent since before her grandmother's birth. She had a voice like silver bells, Caelen said from the doorway, unwilling to cross the threshold. She could make grown men weep with her songs, or laugh until their sides ached. After the transformation, she tried to sing once. The sound that came out was beautiful but wrong, too perfect, too inhuman. She never tried again. What happened to her? She chose to walk into the sunrise rather than live as something she could no longer recognize as herself. The words came out flat, drained of emotion through repetition. Many of our kind make that choice eventually. The weight of immortality becomes too heavy to bear. Elira's fingers stilled on the harp strings. Is that why you live alone? Because everyone you've cared about has chosen death over eternity? Among other reasons. She turned to face him fully, and in the mirror across the room, he caught sight of them both, 2 pale figures in a chamber dedicated to memory and loss. The glass seemed to shimmer for a moment, showing not their current forms, but something else, possibilities perhaps, or warnings of what was to come. I won't make that choice, Elira said with quiet certainty. Whatever this existence brings, I'll face it. I've already lost everything once when my village turned against me. I know how to start over. You don't understand yet what forever means, how it stretches ahead like an endless road with no destination, how every human you might come to care about will age and die while you remain unchanged, how the weight of years accumulates until even breathing becomes an effort. Then perhaps it's fortunate I won't be walking that road alone. The simple statement hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Looking at her standing in his sister's room, surrounded by relics of love and loss, Caelen felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of defenses he had built over centuries of solitude. Perhaps redemption was not something to be earned through suffering, but something to be discovered through connection. Perhaps the damned could find salvation not in isolation, but in the courage to trust another soul with the burden of eternity. The mirror shimmered again, and for just a moment he thought he saw them as they might become not master and unwilling student, but partners in the complex dance of immortal existence. The reflection faded quickly, leaving only the truth of what they were now. 2 creatures caught between human and monster, learning to navigate the space between damnation and hope. The Chronicle of the Damned lay open on Caelen's desk when Elira found his study 3 nights after her transformation. The leather-bound journal was one of his most private possessions, a record he had kept for 2 centuries, documenting every vampire he had encountered, befriended, and ultimately lost. She stood in the doorway, reading over his shoulder, her presence as silent as shadow despite her newborn status. Marcus Aldrich, she read aloud from the page, turned 1847, brilliant mind, gentle soul, lost to madness within 50 years. Elena Voss, turned 1783, beautiful and fierce. Destroyed by hunters in Prague, 1823. Thomas Whitmore, turned 1692, scholar and philosopher, chose the sunrise in 1871. Her voice grew soft as she continued down the list. So many names, so many endings. Caelen closed the journal with deliberate care. You should not be reading that. Why? Because it shows the truth about our kind, that immortality is not a gift but a sentence. She moved around the desk to face him, her green eyes now permanently flecked with gold that caught the firelight. Or because it explains why you hesitate to trust anyone new? Because it serves no purpose except to cause pain. He stood, placing the journal in a drawer that he locked with an ornate silver key. The past is fixed. The future is what we must concern ourselves with now. The future where I remain your prisoner in this beautiful cage? The word hit him like a physical blow. Prisoner? What else would you call someone who cannot leave without permission, who is told where they can go and what they can do? Elira's calm facade cracked slightly, revealing the anger she had kept carefully contained since her transformation. You saved my life, yes, but you also took my freedom. Those are not easy weights to balance on any scale. Caelen had known this moment would come. In the 3 days since her transformation, Elira had adapted to her new nature with remarkable grace, but he had seen the restlessness growing in her movements, the way her eyes lingered on windows that showed the world beyond the keep's walls. The world outside is dangerous for our kind, he said carefully. Hunters know our weaknesses. The church maintains records of how to find and destroy us. A new vampire, alone and untrained, would likely survive better than one locked away from all experience. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. I was a healer for 15 years before you found me. I know how to be careful, how to read people's intentions, how to disappear when necessary. These are not skills that die with mortality. The skills that kept you alive as a human led directly to accusations of witchcraft and an exile that would have killed you. Caelen's voice carried 3 centuries of accumulated caution. Your instincts are mortal instincts. They cannot protect you from the supernatural dangers that hunt our kind. Elira turned from the window, and he saw decision crystallizing in her expression. Then test those instincts. Come with me into the valley. Let me prove I can navigate this new existence without bringing destruction down on us both. Absolutely not. Then I will go without your permission. The simple statement carried such conviction that Caelen felt his protective instincts flare like fire in his chest. You would risk both our existences for the sake of pride? I would risk everything for the chance to prove that I am still capable of making my own choices. She faced him fully, and in her posture he saw echoes of the woman who had defied a mob's hatred even unto death. You cannot keep me safe by keeping me caged. Safety without freedom is just another form of death. They stared at each other across the study, immortal wills clashing in silence. Caelen felt the weight of his accumulated losses pressing against his resolve. Every name in that journal, every friend he had watched fall to carelessness or circumstance. But looking at Elira's determined face, he also saw something else. The recognition that his protection had become another form of the imprisonment she had already escaped once. If we do this, he said finally, we do it my way. You follow my lead, obey my instructions without question, and turn back the moment I sense danger. A smile touched her lips, not triumphant, but relieved. Agreed. And we hunt together first. Your body needs blood more regularly than mine. 3 days of animal blood is barely adequate for a new vampire. If you're to venture into human territory, you need strength that only human blood can provide. The smile faded. I won't kill innocents. Neither will I. But there are always those who prey upon innocence, and their blood carries no moral weight. Caelen moved to a cabinet and withdrew a map of the valley, spreading it across his desk. Bandits use the old smugglers' roads through Raven's Pass. Thieves and worse often take shelter in the abandoned mill outside Thornfield village. We hunt the hunters. An hour later, they made their way down paths. Caelen had not walked in decades. Elira moved with growing confidence, her supernatural senses adapting to the wealth of information the night provided. She could hear conversations from the village miles below, Smell the fierce sweat of animals that sensed predators passing. Feel the vibrations of small creatures moving through the underbrush. "It's overwhelming," she admitted as they paused beside a stream that wound through the mountain forests. "Every sound, every scent, they all demand attention." "Learning to filter the noise is essential," Caelen said. "Focus on what matters: human sense, the sound of steel, the smell of fear or aggression. Let the rest fade to background." They found their quarry at the old mill just as Caelen had predicted. 3 men with the hard faces and casual cruelty of those who lived by taking from others. Their conversation, easily overheard with supernatural senses, confirmed their nature. They were planning to ambush a merchant caravan that would pass this way at dawn. "The leader," Caelen whispered, indicating a scarred man who wore a sword that had clearly seen violent use. "His blood will be rich with guilt. Take him quickly and cleanly. The others will flee, and we let them go." But Elira hesitated, studying the men with her healer's eyes. "The youngest one, he's sick. Fever, probably infection from a wound that's gone untreated. He might die without help. He chose his path when he took up banditry. He chose survival in a world that offered him few alternatives." She looked at Caelen with an expression that reminded him powerfully of his sister's gentle nature. "I was a healer before I was a vampire. Some instincts run deeper than transformation. You cannot save everyone. The attempt will only bring you pain. But I can save some, and that has to be enough." In the end, they took only the leader, a man whose crimes were written in the scars on his hands and the casual way he spoke of violence. Elira drained him efficiently, but not cruelly, granting him a quicker death than he had given his victims. The other 2 bandits fled into the night, the sick one carrying herbs that Elira had quietly left where he would find them. "You realize they'll return to their old ways within a week," Caelen said, as they made their way back up the mountain. "Probably. But tonight the sick one will live, and the other will remember that there are still those in the world who show mercy even to the undeserving." Elira walked with new strength now, the human blood having restored her fully. Sometimes mercy is its own reward, and sometimes mercy is a luxury that gets you killed. She stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. "Then perhaps it's a luxury worth the price. You've spent 3 centuries choosing safety over connection, isolation over risk. How has that served you?" The question hung in the air between them like an accusation. Caelen thought of his journal, of all the names written there, of the endless years stretching ahead with only his own reflection for company. "It has kept me alive. But has it kept you living?" As they continued up the path toward the keep, Caelen found himself unable to answer that question. For the first time in centuries, he was beginning to wonder if mere survival was enough, or if Elira's dangerous compassion might offer something he had forgotten how to hope for. The Chronicle of the Damned would have a new entry soon, he realized, but for the first time he found himself hoping the ending would be different than all those that had come before. The bloodstone amulet around Caelen's neck had never grown warm in 3 centuries of wearing it. His father had given it to him on his 18th birthday, claiming it was blessed by ancient powers to warn of threats to their bloodline. Caelen had always assumed it was merely a family heirloom with sentimental value until the morning it burned against his chest like a brand. He woke from his day sleep with the sensation of fire spreading across his skin. The amulet pulsed with heat that spoke of immediate danger, its deep red stone glowing with inner light that had never manifested before. Beside him, Elira stirred restlessly, her new vampire senses picking up the same wrongness that had roused him hours before sunset. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her eyes snapping open to focus on the chamber's shadows. "I can feel it in the air itself. Malevolence, purpose, the scent of those who hunt." Caelen was already moving, pulling on the dark clothing that allowed him to blend with shadow. The village. Someone has come asking questions. They made their way to the keep's highest tower, where enchanted mirrors had once allowed his family to observe the valleys below without being seen. The magic still functioned, though it required blood to activate, a price Caelen paid willingly as images shimmered to life in the ancient glass. 3 riders had arrived in the village that morning, their black cloaks marking them as members of the Order of the Silver Dawn vampire hunters, whose knowledge and dedication made them the most dangerous mortals their kind could face. Caelen recognized their leader immediately, Brother Marcus Thorn, a man whose family had hunted vampires for 7 generations. "They know," Caelen said, watching as the hunters questioned villagers with methodical precision. "Someone talked. The mob that chased you into the mountains, one of them must have reported seeing something supernatural." Elira pressed close to the mirror, studying their pursuers with the clinical attention she had once given to patients. "The leader moves like a man with old injuries, poorly healed, sword wounds probably. The woman beside him carries herself like nobility, trying to hide her birth. And the third—" She paused, inhaling sharply. "The third carries the scent of our kind. Impossible. No vampire would willingly work with hunters. Not willingly, perhaps, but look at how the others watch him, how he keeps his head covered even in daylight. Either he's been turned and somehow retained the ability to walk in sun, or he's been marked." Caelen felt cold certainty settle in his chest. "There are rituals, old and terrible, that can bind a vampire's will to mortal service. The process usually drives the victim mad within months." In the mirror, they watched the hunters conduct their investigation with ruthless efficiency. Brother Thorn questioned the blacksmith who had reported strange sounds in the night. The noblewoman spoke with the village wise woman about local legends and recent disappearances, and the bound vampire for that was surely what he was moved through. The crowd, like a hound following a scent, his covered head turning inevitably toward the mountain path. "How long before they reach us?" Elira asked. "Hours, if we're fortunate. They'll wait for full darkness. Hunters know that vampires are strongest at night, but they also know we're more predictable then." Caelen stepped back from the mirror, already calculating defensive strategies. "The keep has protections, wards laid down by my ancestors that still hold power, but 3 centuries is a long time, and I don't know how much strength remains in them. Then we leave." "Where would we go?" "They have a tracker now, one of our own kind turned against us. He'll follow our scent across continents if necessary." Elira turned from the mirror to face him, and in her expression he saw the same determination that had carried her through exile and transformation. "Then we face them. You've survived 3 centuries by hiding and running. I survived 30 years of suspicion and hatred by standing my ground when cornered. Perhaps it's time to try my approach. You don't understand what you're suggesting. These hunters have spent lifetimes perfecting their craft. They carry blessed silver, know rituals that can bind our movements, have weapons designed specifically to kill our kind. Brother Thorn alone has destroyed more vampires than most people could count. And yet he's still mortal, still limited by human strength and human speed." She moved to the chamber's weapon rack, selecting a blade that had belonged to his sister, slender, perfectly balanced, designed for quick strikes rather than heavy combat. "You forget that I spent 15 years dealing with people who wanted me dead. I learned to be very good at staying alive, despite their best efforts." Caelen watched her test the weapon's balance, noting how naturally she adapted to its weight and reach. Her mortal memories included more than healing, he realized. Growing up as the granddaughter of a suspected witch, living as a healer in suspicious times would have required skills beyond herbcraft and bone setting. "There's something else," he said, making a decision that went against 3 centuries of caution. "Something I haven't told you about your transformation, about why your blood tasted different than any I've encountered before." She lowered the sword, giving him her full attention. "What? Your bloodline is old, older than most families can trace. The power I sensed in you, the way you adapted so quickly to vampiric existence, it suggests your ancestors included others of our kind. Not recently turned, but ancient bloodlines that trace back to the first vampires. You're saying I was already partially supernatural? I'm saying your village might have been right to fear you, though for reasons they could never have understood. Caelen pulled out a map of the keep's layout, spreading it on the chamber's table. It would explain your prophetic dreams, your natural resistance to vampiric madness, the way you've retained so much of your humanity despite the transformation. Elira stared at the map without seeing it, processing implications that reached far beyond their immediate danger. If that's true, then the hunters aren't just here for you. They're here for me specifically. Someone knows what I am, what I might become. The Order keeps extensive records. If your family's supernatural heritage was documented anywhere, they would have access to it. Caelen began marking defensive positions on the map, but his attention was divided between strategy and growing certainty. This isn't a coincidence, Elira. Your exile, the storm that brought you to me, even the timing of the hunter's arrival, someone has been orchestrating events. Who would have that kind of power, that level of knowledge about bloodlines and prophecy? Before Caelen could answer, the bloodstone amulet flared with heat so intense it nearly burned through his shirt. In the mirror, new images appeared. The hunters had left the village and were already making their way up the mountain path. With them came a fourth figure, one that made Caelen's ancient heart skip, a woman in robes of midnight blue, her face hidden by shadows that moved independently of any light source. "My maker," he whispered, the words carrying 3 centuries of buried pain and rage. "She's come home." Elira moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his with surprising gentleness. "The woman who turned your family? She's working with the hunters, or using them for her own purposes. She was always gifted at manipulation, at making others serve her will while believing they acted from their own desires." The images in the mirror showed the hunters pausing to receive instructions from the shadowed figure, their body language suggesting deference mixed with fear. Whatever game she's playing, we're the pieces she means to capture. Then perhaps it's time to remind her that some pieces refuse to be moved. Elira lifted the sword again, its blade catching the light like captured starfire. "You've spent 3 centuries wondering what happened to the woman who destroyed your family. Tonight, you'll have your answers." The bloodstone amulet pulsed once more, then went dark. In the sudden absence of its heat, Caelen felt a strange calm descend, the peace that came with accepting the inevitable. After 3 centuries of running from his past, it had finally caught up with him. But for the first time, he would not face it alone. "We'll need to prepare the keep's defenses," he said, already moving toward the door. "If we're to make a stand here, we should use every advantage the old wards can provide. And if the defenses fail..." Caelen paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman who had changed everything simply by refusing to accept the limitations of her circumstances. Then we discover whether redemption is something that can be earned through blood and battle, or if some sins are too old and deep to ever be forgiven. The sun was setting beyond the mountains, and with it came the promise of a night that would determine whether their story ended in triumph or tragedy. But whatever came, they would face it together, 2 souls bound by choice as much as by supernatural necessity, ready to discover what love might grow from the ashes of damnation. Elira's mother's locket had survived the mob's violence, hidden beneath her torn cloak throughout the ordeal that led to her transformation. Now, as she prepared for battle in the armory of an ancient keep, she opened the silver pendant to reveal pressed flowers from a garden that no longer existed, forget-me-nots and lavender, dried symbols of remembrance and devotion that her mother had placed there on her wedding day. "She told me they would bring protection to whoever carried them," Elira said, showing Caelen the delicate petals that had somehow retained their color despite the years. "I used to think she meant protection from physical harm. Now I wonder if she meant something deeper, protection for the soul, perhaps." Caelen watched her close the locket and secure it beneath her armor, the simple gesture carrying weight that went beyond sentiment. In the hours since discovering their pursuers, they had worked together to prepare the keep's defenses, and he had learned things about her past that painted her exile in an even darker light. "Tell me about your mother," he said, as they moved through the castle's hidden passages, checking ancient wards that had been carved into stone by his ancestors. "You've mentioned your grandmother's wisdom, but little of the woman who bore you. She died when I was 12. Fever took her during a particularly harsh winter. But before that, she was the heart of our village in ways that went unrecorded in any chronicle." Elira's fingers traced the runic symbols carved into the passage walls, symbols that glowed faintly at her touch. She delivered babies, prepared the dead for burial, knew which herbs could ease pain and which could bring peaceful death to those beyond help. The villagers called it woman's work, natural skills that needed no explanation. But you knew better. I knew she could touch a dying animal and sometimes convince its spirit to return. I saw her speak words over failed crops that would bloom again within days. When the traveling priest came through and declared such things witchcraft, she simply smiled and asked him to explain the difference between miracle and magic. Elira paused at a wardstone that had gone dark, pressing her palm against its surface until it blazed with renewed power. "She told me once that the real magic was in choosing to help despite the risk, in maintaining compassion when the world demanded cruelty." The ease with which she rekindled the ward surprised them both. Ancient magic responded to her touch as if recognizing something familiar, something that belonged to the time when such protections were first created. Caelen watched the light spread through connecting channels carved into the stone, illuminating patterns that had been dark for decades. "Your bloodline runs deeper than I suspected," he said, studying the way the magical energies flowed around her, like water finding its proper course. "These wards were laid by my great-grandfather, a man who lived when vampires and humans still occasionally worked together for mutual protection. They shouldn't respond to anyone, not of his blood, unless my blood shares older connections than either of us realized." Elira moved to the next darkened ward, her touch bringing it blazing to life. "The dreams I had of you, they weren't just prophetic visions, were they? They were memories passed down through bloodlines, knowledge encoded in the very essence of what I am." As they worked their way through the keep's defensive network, other revelations emerged. Documents hidden in sealed chambers spoke of alliances between vampire lords and mortal families blessed with supernatural gifts. Marriage contracts that bound bloodlines across centuries, ensuring that certain powers would continue through carefully maintained lineages. Trade agreements that exchanged protection for knowledge, creating networks of mutual dependence that had survived long after the formal treaties were forgotten. The Order of the Silver Dawn isn't just hunting random vampires, Caelen realized as they studied a map showing territories his family had once protected. They're systematically destroying the old bloodlines, breaking connections that have existed for over 1,000 years. Your exile, my isolation, we're both products of their long campaign to sever supernatural bonds. But why now? Why risk open confrontation after so many years of patient work? The answer came as they returned to the main hall, where ancient mirrors began showing new images without being activated. In the glass, they saw their pursuers making camp at the base of the mountain, but the hunters were no longer alone. Other figures moved in the darkness around their fires, vampires bound to service, their wills shattered by the same rituals that had claimed their tracker. "She's building an army," Caelen whispered, recognizing the signs of his maker's work. "The hunters think they're using her knowledge to destroy vampires, but she's using them to capture and bind our kind to her service. How many has she taken? Too many." In the mirror, Caelen counted at least a dozen bound vampires moving through the shadows, ancient beings reduced to puppets, their centuries of accumulated power now serving the will of their captor. Some of those faces I recognize. They were free when last I heard of them, lords of their own territories with followers and families of their own. Elira moved closer, studying the bound vampires with a healer's eye for suffering. They're not just controlled, they're in constant agony. I can see it in how they move, how they hold themselves. The binding is slowly destroying their minds while preserving their bodies. She always preferred elaborate tortures to simple death. During the war against my family, she kept prisoners alive for months, breaking them piece by piece until they begged to serve her. Caelen's hand moved unconsciously to the locket at Elira's throat, drawing comfort from its presence. I should have killed her then, when I had the chance. My mercy has cost others their freedom. Your mercy kept you human despite your nature. Don't let 3 centuries of guilt convince you that compassion is weakness. Elira covered his hand with hers, the simple touch grounding him in the present moment. Besides, you weren't alone then, and you're not alone now. Sometimes the best response to overwhelming force is equally overwhelming love. Before he could ask what she meant, the keep's outer defenses activated in a cascade of light that turned night into day. The hunters had begun their assault, but instead of the careful, methodical approach Caelen had expected, they came with supernatural speed and coordination that spoke of detailed knowledge about the castle's layout. The bound vampires, Elira said, drawing her sword as alarm bells began tolling throughout the keep. They're sharing their memories with the hunters, showing them exactly where to strike. The first explosion shook the ancient walls as enchanted weapons met wards that had protected this place for centuries. Through the windows, they could see figures scaling the outer walls with inhuman agility. Hunters supported by vampires, their combined abilities making them far more dangerous than either group alone. The Great Hall, Caelen decided, leading Elira toward the heart of the keep. If we're going to make a stand, it should be where my family's power was strongest. The throne room has wards layered so deep that even she might not be able to break them quickly. They ran through corridors that blazed with awakening magic, past portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch their passage with approving eyes. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew closer, steel ringing against steel, voices raised in pain and rage, the distinctive crack of wards failing under sustained assault. "Caelen," Elira called as they reached the massive doors of the throne room. "Whatever happens in there, remember that some choices transcend survival. Some bonds matter more than safety." He paused with his hand on the door's ornate handle, looking at the woman who had changed everything simply by refusing to despair. In her face, he saw not just courage, but something he had forgotten. He could feel hope for a future that might contain more than endless solitude. "I remember," he said, and opened the doors to face whatever destiny awaited them in the chamber where his family had once ruled with wisdom and justice. The throne room blazed with silver light as they entered, its walls covered with wards so complex they seemed to move and shift like living things. At the center, on a dais carved from a single piece of black stone, stood 2 thrones, one for the Lord, one for the Lady, equal in height and dignity. For the first time in 3 centuries, both would be occupied. The Maker's compass had been hidden in the deepest vault of the keep for 3 centuries, sealed behind wards that Caelen himself had forgotten how to breach. But as the sounds of battle echoed through the corridors above, the ancient artifact began to pulse with light that penetrated even the strongest magical barriers. The mystical device, crafted from silver and starlight by the first vampires, was designed to point toward one's creator, a tool for finding lost makers or tracking wayward progeny across vast distances. Tonight, it spun wildly in its crystal case, the needle moving between 2 different magnetic pulls with increasing violence until the entire chamber shook with its conflicted energy. "That's impossible," Caelen breathed, staring at the compass as realization dawned like ice water in his veins. "It's responding to 2 different bloodlines, mine and mine," Elira finished, her voice hollow with understanding. "Oh, gods! She didn't find me by chance in that storm. She created the storm. She arranged everything, my exile, the accusations of witchcraft, even the timing of when you would find me dying." The compass needle finally settled, pointing directly at Elira with unwavering certainty. The implications hit them both like physical blows. She was not just descended from vampire bloodlines, she was directly descended from Caelen's maker. The woman who had destroyed his family had orchestrated events to bring her own bloodline back to him, creating a bond that went deeper than simple transformation. "She's been planning this for centuries," Caelen said, his mind racing through the implications. "Using me to complete her great-granddaughter's transformation, ensuring that the power in your bloodline would awaken fully. But why? What does she gain from binding us together?" Before Elira could answer, the throne room's great doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and silver light. The hunters poured through the breach, led by Brother Thorn with his blessed sword already drawn. Behind them came the bound vampires, their faces twisted with the agony of forced servitude, and finally, moving with the terrible grace of a creature that had mastered centuries of accumulated power, came the woman who had haunted Caelen's nightmares for 300 years. She had not aged a day since he last saw her, tall and elegant, with silver hair that moved like liquid mercury and eyes that held the depth of eternity. Her beauty was flawless and terrible, the kind of perfection that spoke of power so ancient it had transcended mortal concepts of time and change. When she smiled, revealing fangs like pearls carved from moonlight, Caelen felt the old terror rise in his chest despite centuries of accumulated strength. "My dear, sweet boy," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Still hiding in your mountain fortress, still pretending that isolation can protect you from the truth of what you are. And you've brought my blood daughter home to me at last. How wonderfully predictable." "Seraphina," Caelen snarled, moving to place himself between Elira and the creature who had destroyed everything he had ever loved. "What do you want?" "Want?" Seraphina laughed, the sound like silver bells tolling for the dead. "I want nothing, child. I already have everything I need. You've done exactly what I knew you would do, saved the dying girl, transformed her out of misguided mercy, and awakened the full power of her bloodline in the process. 3 centuries of patience, and finally my grand design comes to fruition." Brother Thorn stepped forward, his blessed blade gleaming with holy light that made the shadows dance away from its edge. "Enough talk, creature. You promised us the heads of 2 vampires in exchange for our service. Deliver them, or face the consequences of breaking faith with the Order." Seraphina's smile widened, and Caelen saw something in her expression that made his ancient blood run cold, the look of a predator who had been playing with her food for far too long and was finally ready to feed. "Oh, my dear Brother Thorn," she purred, moving with liquid grace to stand beside the hunter. "I promised you the heads of 2 vampires, yes, but I never specified which vampires." Her hand moved faster than mortal eyes could follow, fingers elongating into claws that punched through the hunter's armor like it was paper. Brother Thorn's blessed sword clattered to the floor as he stared in shock at the hand emerging from his chest, silver light dimming in his eyes as his life's blood pumped out between her fingers. "You see," Seraphina continued conversationally, letting the hunter's body fall as she turned to face his companions, "I needed the Order's resources to track down my scattered bloodline, but I never actually intended to share the rewards with mortals. You've served your purpose admirably." Chaos erupted in the throne room as the remaining hunters realized they had been betrayed. Some fled toward the shattered doors, only to find their path blocked by bound vampires who moved with mechanical precision to cut down their former allies. Others tried to fight, their blessed weapons proving ineffective against creatures who had been specifically prepared to resist holy power. Through the carnage, Seraphina moved like a dancer, her movements graceful and economical as she systematically eliminated the humans who had served her purposes. But her attention never wavered from Caelen and Elira, her ancient eyes tracking them with the focused intensity of a cat watching mice. "Do you understand now?" she called over the sounds of battle, her voice carrying easily despite the chaos. This was never about revenge, child. This was about completion, about fulfilling a destiny that was set in motion the night I turned your family. You destroyed them! Caelen roared, his rage finally overwhelming his caution. My parents, my sister, they died because of your manipulations. They died because they were flawed vessels, unable to contain the power I tried to gift them. Seraphina stepped over a hunter's corpse without looking down, her attention fixed entirely on her creations. But you survived because you were meant to survive. You carried my bloodline forward through 3 centuries of solitude, keeping it pure and strong until the time came to unite it with its perfect complement. She gestured toward Elira, who stood frozen beside the thrones as understanding crashed over her like a tide. My great-granddaughter, descended from the only other bloodline that can match mine in power and purity. Born to be your mate, trained in the healing arts that would complement your warrior's nature, shaped by exile and persecution until she was ready to embrace the darkness you could offer. The dreams, Elira whispered, her face pale with horror. You sent me dreams of him. You made me think I was seeing the future, but you were just showing me the path you wanted me to walk. I gave you glimpses of possibility, nothing more. The choices were always yours to make. Seraphina's smile was brilliant and terrible, but I knew you would choose correctly. Blood calls to blood, power recognizes power, and love, even love born from desperation, creates bonds that transcend mere mortality. The last hunter fell, his scream cut short by claws that opened his throat to the bone. In the sudden silence that followed, the bound vampires arranged themselves in a circle around the throne room, their dead eyes fixed on Caelen and Elira with the mechanical attention of puppets awaiting commands. And now, Seraphina said, spreading her arms wide as if to embrace the carnage she had orchestrated, we come to the true purpose of this evening's entertainment. You will submit to me willingly, both of you, and accept the bonds that will make you perfect servants of my will. Or you will watch each other suffer torments beyond imagination until madness claims you both. There is a third option, Elira said quietly, her hand finding Caelen's as she stepped forward to stand beside him rather than behind his protection. We could choose to trust each other instead of trusting you. Seraphina's perfect features twisted with momentary confusion. What? You've spent centuries manipulating us, arranging our lives to serve your purposes, treating us like pieces on a game board. Elira's voice grew stronger as she spoke, the fear in her eyes transforming into something far more dangerous: determination born from righteous anger. But you made one crucial mistake in all your planning. And what mistake was that, child? Elira smiled, and in that expression Caelen saw not the healer he had saved from a storm, but the woman who had faced down a mob's hatred and emerged stronger for the experience. You assumed that power inherited was the same as power chosen. You assumed that bonds forged in manipulation could be stronger than bonds freely given. You forget that I can simply take what I want from you both. Your consent is a courtesy, not a necessity. Then you understand even less than I thought. Elira raised her free hand, and the ancient wards carved into the throne room's walls blazed with light that made even Seraphina step backward. Because consent isn't just about submission, it's about the right to refuse, and we refuse to be your puppets. The light grew brighter, fed by power that flowed not from Seraphina's ancient bloodline, but from something far older, the magic of choice itself. The force that had built these wards centuries ago, when vampires and humans had worked together instead of preying upon each other. For the first time in over 1,000 years, Seraphina looked uncertain, and in that uncertainty, Caelen saw the first glimmer of hope that they might actually survive the night. The Covenant blade lay in its ancient resting place within the throne room's hidden alcove, wrapped in silk that had not been disturbed for 3 centuries. Caelen had forgotten its existence until the blazing ward light revealed the concealed compartment. its stone seal cracking open to reveal the weapon his grandfather had commissioned from the last of the old smiths, a blade capable of cutting through any supernatural bond, including the ties that bound vampires to their makers. "It requires blood from both wielders to awaken," Caelen said, studying the inscription carved into the blade's fuller. "Not just any blood, but blood freely given in perfect trust." The sword was meant to be used by bonded pairs vampires who had chosen each other rather than being forced together by circumstance or coercion. Elira reached for the weapon, her fingers stopping just short of its leather-wrapped grip. "And if it doesn't accept us? If our bond isn't strong enough, or pure enough, to satisfy whatever enchantment protects it, then we face Seraphina with conventional weapons against power that has had over 1,000 years to accumulate strength." Caelen watched the bound vampires maintaining their vigil around the throne room's perimeter, their dead eyes never blinking, never wavering from their assigned positions. "She's giving us time to despair, to exhaust ourselves with futile planning." It's one of her favorite psychological tactics. The ancient vampire had withdrawn after Elira's display of ward magic, retreating to the castle's courtyard where she held court among the slaughtered hunters. Through the throne room's tall windows, they could see her moving among the bound vampires she had brought, adjusting their positions like a general arranging pieces on a battlefield. The casual confidence in her movements spoke of someone who had never doubted the outcome of any conflict. "Tell me about the others," Elira said, nodding toward the figures visible in the courtyard. "The vampires she's enslaved. Some of them you recognized. Lord Aldrich of the Eastern Territories. I knew him as an honorable man who protected human settlements from rogue vampires. Lady Corvina from the Northern Reaches. She maintained a library of supernatural knowledge and shared it freely with scholars both mortal and immortal. Baron Thornfield," Caelen's voice caught as he identified another face. "He was turned during the same plague years as my family. We grew up together, played as children before either of us knew what we were destined to become." "How long have they been enslaved?" "Decades, some of them, perhaps longer." Caelen studied the way the bound vampires moved, mechanical, empty of will or personality, their individual characteristics erased by whatever ritual had claimed them. "She's been building this army for far longer than we realized. Every vampire of power or influence who refused to serve her willingly has eventually found themselves in her web." Elira moved to the throne room's map table, where charts of the surrounding territories lay spread beneath crystalline weights. Her fingers traced roads and rivers with the systematic attention of someone accustomed to planning complex endeavors. "She's not just collecting random vampires. Look at the pattern each of these territories borders on major human settlements. She's positioning herself to control the interaction between our kinds. A shadow empire," Caelen realized. Seeing the strategy with new clarity, make herself indispensable to both sides, protecting humans from rogue vampires while eliminating any of our kind who might challenge her authority. Within a generation, she could control supernatural activity across the entire continent. And we're the keystone to that plan. Two bloodlines united under her control, legitimizing her rule through ancient right of lineage. Elira picked up the Covenant blade, its weight settling naturally in her grasp, despite her lack of formal sword training. "She needs us alive and bound to her will. Dead, we're just corpses. Free, we're proof that her power can be resisted. Which means she won't kill us quickly, no matter what we do. She'll try to break our spirits first, turn us against each other, make us choose submission as the lesser evil." Caelen moved to stand beside her, his hand covering hers on the weapon's grip. "That gives us advantages, but also terrible dangers. She has centuries of experience in breaking minds that seemed unbreakable." The blade grew warm beneath their joined touch, its silver surface beginning to gleam with inner light. Ancient runes carved along its edge blazed to life, symbols of protection, unity, and the unbreakable bonds that could exist between souls who chose each other freely. For a moment, the weapon's radiance outshone even the ward lights surrounding them. "It accepts us," Elira breathed, wonder and relief warring in her voice. "Whatever we are to each other, it's enough. For the blade, perhaps, but is it enough for what we must do?" Caelen studied her face in the sword's glow, memorizing features that had become precious to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "She'll try to convince you that I forced this transformation upon you, that I'm no different from her in my willingness to make choices for others without consent. She'll try to convince you that I'm playing a role, that my acceptance of vampirism is just another manipulation in her grand design." Elira's fingers tightened on the blade's grip, her knuckles white with determination. "We have to trust what we know of each other, not what she wants us to believe." They spent the next hour in preparation that went beyond the merely tactical. Caelen shared memories of Serafina's weaknesses, her pride that could be turned against her, her tendency to explain her victories in elaborate detail, her need to be seen as superior in all things. Elira spoke of her own experiences with manipulation and gaslighting, the techniques she had developed for maintaining her sense of self when entire communities conspired to make her doubt her own perceptions. "She'll separate us if possible," Caelen warned, checking the placement of weapons they had gathered from the armory. "Her power is strongest when she can isolate her victims, cut them off from any support or reminder of their true nature. Then we don't let her separate us." Elira tested the balance of a silver dagger, its blessed blade humming with power designed to cut through supernatural defenses. "Whatever happens, we stay together. If one of us falls, the other continues the fight. If both of us fall, we fall together, and she gains nothing but corpses." Caelen completed the thought, surprised by how much comfort he found in the idea. After 3 centuries of solitude, the prospect of not facing death alone seemed like a gift rather than a tragedy. Outside, the wind was shifting, bringing with it scents that spoke of dawn, still hours away but approaching with inexorable certainty. Serafina would move before sunrise. Darkness was when vampire power reached its peak, and she would want every advantage for the final confrontation. "There's something else we need to discuss," Elira said, her voice carefully controlled. "The bond between us, it's not just emotional anymore. I can feel your heartbeat even when you're across the room. I know when you're afraid or angry or hurt, as if your emotions were my own." Caelen nodded, having noticed the same phenomenon. Vampire bonds can deepen under extreme circumstances. What we're experiencing is rare, but not unknown. It usually requires either great love or great trauma to manifest so quickly. Or both. She met his eyes directly, her gaze steady despite the implications of what they were discussing. "If we're truly bonded at that level, then whatever she does to one of us will affect the other. Torture me, and you'll feel every moment of pain. Break your mind, and mine may follow. And yet, you're still willing to fight beside me. I'm willing to die beside you, if that's what it takes to stop her." Elira lifted the Covenant blade, its light casting silver patterns on the ancient walls. "But I'd rather live beside you, if we can manage it." Before Caelen could respond, the temperature in the throne room dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Their breath began to mist, and frost formed on the windows despite the autumn warmth outside. The bound vampires in the courtyard had begun to move, arranging themselves in formations that spoke of military precision and supernatural coordination. "She's coming," Elira said unnecessarily, both of them able to feel the pressure of ancient power approaching like a storm front rolling across the mountains. "Remember," Caelen said, moving to stand beside the thrones where his ancestors had once ruled with justice and wisdom, "she needs us functional. Every moment she spends trying to break us is a moment we can use to find her weakness. And remember, Elira replied, taking her position on the other side of the dais, the covenant blade gleaming in her hands like captured starlight. That love freely given is the strongest force in any universe. She's forgotten that truth, if she ever knew it at all. The throne room's great doors began to creak open, moved by invisible force that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. Through the widening gap, silver light began to spill, not the warm radiance of ward magic, but the cold brilliance of vampire power accumulated over millennia. Seraphina's voice reached them before her form became visible, echoing off ancient stones with harmonics that seemed designed to inspire terror and submission in equal measure. "My dear children," she called, her tone carrying the false warmth of a predator who had grown tired of playing with her food. "Have you had sufficient time to contemplate your situation? To understand the futility of resistance against power that was ancient when your ancestors were still mortal? We've had time to remember what we're fighting for," Caelen replied, his voice carrying across the throne room with authority that had not diminished despite centuries of exile. "Something you've apparently forgotten in your pursuit of dominion over others." Seraphina stepped fully into the throne room, her perfect beauty rendered terrible by the cold calculation in her ancient eyes. Behind her came the bound vampires, moving with the synchronized precision of puppets whose strings were held by a master performer. "Fighting for each other, you mean? How wonderfully romantic." Her smile revealed fangs like slivers of ice, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "Tell me, children, when I begin to flay the skin from her bones, will you still believe that love is stronger than power? When I force you to watch her sanity crumble piece by carefully orchestrated piece, will you still think your bond can protect you from my will?" "There's only one way to find out," Elira said, raising the covenant blade until its light blazed like a fallen star in the darkness of the throne room. The final battle was about to begin. The heart of the keep lay beneath the throne room's dais, accessible only through a hidden stair that opened when both royal bloodlines pressed their hands to the ancient seal. The mystical crystal that powered the castle's defenses had been dormant for decades. Its azure light dimmed to barely a flicker as the old magic slowly faded from the world. But as Caelen and Elira descended into the chamber that housed their ancestors' greatest secret, the massive gem began to pulse with renewed vigor. "It requires blood from the Lord and Lady of the Keep," Caelen explained, as they approached the crystal formation that rose from floor to ceiling like a frozen waterfall. "Not just any vampire blood, but the freely given essence of those who rule together, bound by choice rather than force." Above them, the throne room erupted in violence as Seraphina's bound vampires smashed through the weakened wards. The ancient protections that had held for centuries crumbled under coordinated assault, silver light flickering and dying as supernatural forces overwhelmed defenses built for a different kind of war. "She's not trying to capture the throne room," Elira realized, pressing her palm against the crystal surface. "She's driving us exactly where she wants us to go down here, to the source of the keep's power. Because she knows that activating the heart requires a bond she can't break through force." Caelen placed his hand beside hers on the crystal, feeling the ancient magic respond to their combined presence. "If we succeed, we prove that our connection is real, freely chosen, unbreakable. If we fail, we die together in the attempt, and she gains nothing but an empty castle." Elira smiled grimly, her fangs gleaming in the crystal's growing light. "Either outcome denies her what she actually wants." The heart pulsed once, twice, then blazed with azure fire that filled the chamber with light, bright enough to be seen through solid stone. Power flowed through channels carved into the walls, awakening defenses that had slept for generations. Throughout the keep, ward stones ignited in sequence, creating barriers of force that would challenge even Seraphina's accumulated might. Above them, the sounds of battle intensified as the reborn defenses met supernatural assault. Serafina's voice rose in fury as her easy victory transformed into costly siege. Her bound vampires, thrown back by energies that recognized no authority but freely chosen love. "Impressive," came the ancient vampire's voice, carrying down through stone as if the walls themselves had become her throat. "You've managed to awaken power that has slept since your grandfather's time. But ward magic requires constant maintenance, constant sacrifice. How long can you sustain defenses that were designed to protect an entire kingdom?" The answer came in the form of cracks appearing in the crystal's surface hairline, fractures that spread as the heart struggled to power protections meant for a much larger population. The gem had been designed to draw strength from hundreds of vampires living within the keep's walls, sharing the burden of maintaining such extensive magical defenses. With only two sources to draw upon, even bonded bloodlines could not provide sufficient energy for long. "Minutes," Caelen said, watching the cracks spread across the crystal's perfect surface. "Perhaps less. The heart is burning itself out, trying to power defenses meant for an entire court." "Then we use those minutes wisely." Elira drew the Covenant blade, its silver length blazing with light that complemented the crystal's azure fire. "If we can't maintain the defenses, we'll have to take the fight to her directly." They ascended to find the throne room transformed into a battlefield. Ward light clashed against shadow magic in displays that turned the air itself into sheets of colored flame. Serafina stood at the chamber's center, her hands weaving patterns that sent waves of force against the crystalline barriers protecting the dais. Around her, the bound vampires moved with mechanical precision, their combined assault focused on specific weak points in the ancient protections. "You cannot hide behind your ancestors' magic forever," Serafina called, her voice carrying easily over the chaos of magical combat. "Every moment you delay simply increases the pain I'll inflict when your defenses finally crumble. Every moment we delay proves that some bonds cannot be broken by force," Elira replied, stepping through the ward barrier with the Covenant blade raised before her. "No matter how ancient your power, no matter how complete your dominion over others." Serafina's perfect features twisted with genuine surprise as the blade's light washed over her, forcing her to step backward for the first time in the conflict. "Impossible. That weapon was destroyed centuries ago. Hidden, not destroyed. Waiting for wielders worthy of its purpose." Caelen joined Elira beyond the protection of the wards, moving with the synchronized precision that came from their deepening bond. "My grandfather knew that some battles could only be won by those who chose to fight together rather than being commanded to serve." The bound vampires surged forward at Serafina's gesture, their faces empty of will, but their movements coordinated with terrifying efficiency. Caelen and Elira met their assault with supernatural speed and the kind of tactical coordination that spoke of minds truly united rather than merely allied. The Covenant blade carved through enchanted chains that bound souls to unwilling service, each severed connection freeing another vampire from Serafina's control. But for every bondage broken, two more bound vampires entered the fray, their numbers seeming inexhaustible. "Do you see now?" Serafina laughed, her hands weaving new patterns that sent waves of compulsion crashing against their defenses. "Love is just another form of slavery, pretty chains that bind you to suffering. I offer honest dominion, clean, simple, without the messy complications of emotion. You offer emptiness disguised as strength," Elira countered, the blade's light growing brighter as it fed on the power of her conviction. "Connection without choice, order without meaning, existence without purpose." Behind them, the heart of the keep pulsed one final time before going dark, its crystal surface shattering as the ancient magic finally exhausted itself. The ward barriers flickered and died, leaving them exposed in the center of the throne room with only their weapons and their bond for protection. "And now," Serafina said, her smile brilliant with anticipated victory, "we discover whether your precious love can protect you from power that has conquered empires." The real battle was about to begin. The blood bond chalice emerged from its hidden alcove as the throne room's ancient magics recognized the approaching moment of ultimate choice. Carved from a single piece of starfall obsidian and rimmed with silver older than recorded history, the sacred vessel had been used by Caelen's ancestors to formalize bonds that transcended mere transformation connections, forged in perfect trust between equals who chose each other freely. "The willing bond," Seraphina hissed as she recognized the chalice's significance. "You think to use my own bloodline's power against me? That relic requires sacrifice beyond anything you understand." Around them, the freed vampires were beginning to remember themselves, faces that had been empty masks of servitude, now showing confusion, pain, and growing recognition of their situation. Some fled immediately, seeking escape from a battle that had already cost them years or decades of enslavement. Others remained, their eyes focusing on Seraphina with the kind of hatred that only comes from profound betrayal. "The chalice doesn't require sacrifice," Elira said, moving toward the ancient vessel while keeping the Covenant blade ready for combat. "It requires choice, the willing surrender of individual will to create something greater than either soul could achieve alone." "Pretty words," Seraphina snarled, her composure finally cracking as her carefully orchestrated victory slipped away. "Let's see how pretty they sound when I tear your bond apart from the inside." She struck with power that made the air itself scream, force focused not on their bodies, but on the connection between them, seeking to shatter the emotional ties that had made their resistance possible. The assault hit Caelen like ice water, injected directly into his veins, carrying whispers of doubt and despair that felt like his own thoughts but spoke with Seraphina's voice. Asterisk, she doesn't truly care for you. She accepted the transformation to avoid death, nothing more. When the glamour fades, she'll see you for what you really are, a monster who destroys everything he touches. Asterisk. Through their bond he felt Elira weathering similar mental assault, her consciousness flooded with fears that rang with terrible plausibility. Asterisk. He saved you only because you reminded him of his lost family. You're a substitute, a replacement for what he truly loved. When he tires of the novelty, he'll abandon you just as she abandoned him. Asterisk. But instead of driving them apart, the psychic attack served only to illuminate the truth of their connection. Each false whisper was met with genuine memory, the moment Caelen had chosen to risk everything to save a stranger, the instant Elira had accepted vampirism not just as survival, but as partnership with someone who understood isolation and responsibility. "Your turn," Elira said, grabbing the chalice and pressing it into Caelen's hands along with her own. Together, they bit into their own wrists simultaneously, letting blood flow into the ancient vessel until the obsidian bowl filled with crimson that seemed to hold its own inner light. The moment their blood mingled, power erupted through their shared bond, not the cold force of dominion that Seraphina wielded, but the warm strength that came from souls choosing to trust completely. "Impossible," Seraphina breathed, stepping backward as waves of combined power washed over her. "No bond can be that pure, that complete. There's always doubt, always reservation. Not when the choice is made freely," Caelen said, feeling strength flow through him that was greater than anything he had experienced in 3 centuries of existence. Not when it's made by equals who see each other clearly and choose partnership anyway. Together, they drank from the chalice, sealing a bond that went beyond vampiric transformation or supernatural connection. The ritual created something unprecedented, 2 souls so perfectly united that attacking one meant facing the combined strength of both. Seraphina's expression shifted from disbelief to fury as she realized her fundamental mistake. She had spent 1,000 years viewing relationships as power structures, bonds as chains of dominion and submission. The possibility of true equality, of connection without hierarchy, was so foreign to her nature that she had never prepared defenses against it. "If I cannot have your willing service," she said, raising her hands as power gathered around her like a storm of living shadow, "then I will ensure that no one benefits from your defiance. Better to rule over ashes than to be denied rule entirely." The final assault came with the force of centuries behind it, pure destruction rather than subtle manipulation, power meant to obliterate rather than control. But it struck not two separate vampires struggling to coordinate their defense, but a single entity expressed through two forms, their combined strength exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. The Covenant blade blazed like a captured star as Elira channeled their united power through its enchanted steel. When it met Seraphina's attack, the collision sent shockwaves through the keep that cracked ancient stones and shattered windows that had withstood centuries of storms. In that moment of perfect clarity that comes only in life's most crucial instance, Caelen saw Seraphina not as the terrifying maker who had haunted his nightmares, but as what she truly was, a creature so consumed by the need to dominate that she had forgotten what it meant to connect with another being as an equal. "I pity you," he said, driving the blade forward with strength borrowed from the woman who had chosen to stand beside him rather than flee. "All that power, all those centuries, and you never learned the difference between being feared and being loved." The Covenant blade found its mark, piercing through defenses that had protected Seraphina for over a millennium. But instead of destroying her, it did something far more profound. It severed her connection to the bound vampires she had enslaved, freeing them all simultaneously and leaving her suddenly, completely alone. For the first time in 1,000 years, Seraphina felt genuine fear, and in that fear, she finally began to understand what she had lost by choosing dominion over connection. The new dawn rose bloomed in the keep's courtyard 3 days after Seraphina's defeat, its petals unfurling in defiance of the season's dying light. Legend claimed the mystical flower appeared only in the presence of redeemed love bonds that had been tested by darkness and emerged stronger for the trial. Elira found it growing where the ancient vampire's body had crumbled to dust, its silver petals catching the first rays of dawn that she could now witness without fear. The transformation in their nature had been gradual but unmistakable. The blood bond forged in the chalice had changed more than just their connection to each other. It had altered their very essence as vampires. They could walk in daylight without pain, sustain themselves on the life force of willing participants rather than requiring death, and most remarkably, they could grant others the choice that had been stolen from them both. "She's coming up the mountain path," Caelen said, joining Elira in the garden where she tended the rose with hands that no longer feared the sun's touch. "Third refugee this week. Word is spreading through the supernatural community that the keep has become a sanctuary." The woman, making her way up the ancient road, was young, perhaps 20 in mortal years, with the hollow-eyed look of someone fleeing persecution. Caelen and Elira had seen that expression often in recent days, vampires abandoned by their makers, humans cast out for supernatural gifts they couldn't control, and those caught between worlds who belonged fully to neither. "Her scent carries silver," Elira observed, her enhanced senses reading the story written in the stranger's blood. "Hunter's poison, but old. She's been carrying it for months without proper treatment." They met the refugee at the courtyard gates, offering water and the kind of welcome that had become routine since establishing their sanctuary. Her name was Sarah, she told them, and she had been fleeing vampire hunters for the better part of a year after her transformation went wrong, incomplete, leaving her neither fully human nor properly vampire. "I heard there was a place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "where people like us could find help, where choices were offered instead of taken." "Choices are all we offer," Caelen said, leading her toward the great hall where other refugees had found shelter. "No one is required to stay, no one is forced to leave. Whatever healing or help we can provide is yours freely, with no debt or obligation attached." The great hall bore little resemblance to the empty monument it had been for 3 centuries. Now it bustled with quiet activity as nearly 24 residents pursued studies, crafts, and conversations that would have been impossible in the outside world. Marcus, the first freed vampire they had encountered, worked with 3 others to transcribe ancient texts before their knowledge was lost forever. Elena, a half-vampire like Sarah, tended a garden of healing herbs that drew on both mortal and supernatural botanics. Thomas, whose scholarly nature had survived his decades of enslavement, maintained a library that served as repository for supernatural knowledge from across the continent. "It's not just a sanctuary," Elira explained as they found Sarah a place at the communal table. "It's become a school, a hospital, a place where people can learn what they are and what they might become. The old boundaries between human and vampire, between healer and warrior, are dissolving here." In the weeks following Seraphina's defeat, they had discovered that their transformed nature was not unique to them. Other vampires who had forged genuine bonds of love and trust found themselves changing as well, gaining abilities that transcended the traditional limitations of their kind. The keep had become a beacon for these evolved beings, a place where new forms of existence could be explored safely. "The rose tells us when we're succeeding," Caelen said, gesturing toward the courtyard where the mystical flower continued to bloom despite autumn's approach. "Each person who finds genuine healing here, who chooses their path freely rather than having it imposed, the rose grows a little brighter, a little stronger." Sarah looked around the hall with wonder that slowly replaced the fear she had carried for so long. "And you ask for nothing in return?" "We ask that you be yourself, as fully and authentically as possible," Elira replied. "That you use whatever gifts you have to help others when you can. That you remember the value of choice and protect it in others as we've tried to protect it for you." As evening fell, Caelen and Elira made their way to the solar that had once been his solitary refuge. The room bore new additions, now a second chair by the fireplace, books on healing arts shelved beside volumes of military strategy, and windows that had been modified to let in more light during the day. On the mantel, Elira's healing satchel sat beside Caelen's bloodstone ring, artifacts of their separate pasts now united in their shared present. "Do you ever regret it?" Elira asked, as they settled by the fire, watching flames dance over logs that no longer provided mere illusion of warmth. "The choice to save me that night? Everything that followed?" Caelen considered the question with the gravity it deserved, looking back over the months that had transformed his existence from isolated survival to purposeful partnership. "I regret the pain you suffered. I regret that the choice was forced upon you by circumstances rather than offered freely. But regret saving you? Never." "Good," she said, moving to stand by the window that looked out over their thriving sanctuary. "Because I have something to tell you, something that will change our future as much as that storm changed our past." He joined her at the window, following her gaze to the garden where the new dawn rose glowed with inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their shared heartbeat. "What is it?" "Vampire reproduction was thought impossible, our bodies too changed by the transformation to sustain new life. But bonds like ours, forged in perfect trust and willing sacrifice, seem to transcend even that limitation." Elira's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the easy grace of lovers who had faced eternity together. "We're going to have a child, Caelen, a new life born from our choice to love despite the darkness." The implications were staggering, a vampire child, born of love rather than created through violent transformation, raised in an environment of acceptance rather than fear, educated in the arts of healing as well as survival. Their offspring would be something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds that had been artificially separated for too long. "What does that make us?" Caelen asked, wonder and trepidation warring in his voice. "What does that make our child?" "It makes us family," Elira said simply. "It makes us hope, and it makes us living proof that even the damned can find redemption if they're willing to choose love over fear." Outside their window, The new dawn rose blazed like a star fallen to earth, its light visible for miles around a beacon, calling to all who had lost their way in darkness, promising them the chance to choose their own path toward whatever form of salvation they could create together. The age of solitary vampires was ending, the age of chosen family was about to begin. And in the keep that had once echoed only with the footsteps of the lost and lonely, laughter rang through halls that would never again be empty.